Welcome, friends, to the United Lodge of Theosophists in the Washington, D.C. area. Today our topic is sound and vibration, but we'd like to begin with some opening remarks about the Lodge and its policies. The declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists is as follows. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It's loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers. The sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with these declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. So there will be a reading from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10. Krishna is speaking. I am the origin of all. All things proceed from me. Believing me to be thus, the wise gifted with spiritual wisdom worship me. Their very hearts and minds are in me, enlightening one another and constantly speaking of me. They are full of enjoyment and satisfaction. To them, thus always devoted to me, who worship me with love, I give that mental devotion by which they come to me. For them do I, out of my compassion, standing within their hearts, destroy the darkness which springs from ignorance by the brilliant lamp of spiritual discernment. I am, O Arjuna, the seed of all existing things, and there is not anything, whether animate or inanimate, which is without me. My divine manifestations, O harasser of thy foes, are without end. The many which I have mentioned are by way of example. Whatever creature is permanent, of good fortune or mighty, also know it to be sprung from a portion of my energy. But what, O Arjuna, hast thou to do with so much knowledge as this? I establish this whole universe with a single portion of myself and remain separate. And now the talk on sound and vibration.
Friends, good morning. The subject here, sound and vibration, is no less than everything. Right? It speaks to the very origins of the cosmos, all the way to our daily lives. There's nothing anywhere that is without vibration. Sound being a particular form of vibration. So, the first fundamental proposition of the Secret Doctrine suggests that there's an absolute abstract reality, proto-consciousness, a primordial pre-existence before there's anything that we can call objective reality. She says that it's symbolized by absolute abstract space and absolute abstract motion. And these ideas of space and motion will figure in throughout the talk this morning. The first fundamental articulates cosmogenesis and leads seamlessly into the second fundamental proposition, and that's that the universe and everything in it is governed by natural law. In particular, the law of cycles. So today's talk is on sound and vibration, which puts it firmly in this realm. When we talk about sound, we're talking about vibration, oscillation, causation. We're talking about polarity and duality and causality. When we talk about vibration, we're really talking about the larger subset of all electromagnetic energies. Not just audible sound or visible light, but infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, radiation, gamma radiation, and the vibration of atoms and electrons and photons. This phenomenon is at the smallest measurable forms. It's also present in what Shakespeare and Pythagoras call the music of the spheres. We see it in planets oscillating predictably around stars, and stars predictably around their galactic centers, and galaxies around and through space. So we'll take on also the second object of the Theosophical movement, as it's written by H.P. Blavatsky and reprinted in the program of the United Lodge of Theosophists, which we just heard, and that is the study of ancient and modern sciences and the demonstration of the importance of such study, to paraphrase. So let's start at the beginning. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God separated the light from the darkness. We can see that this is all about going from the non-duality of the absolute, the first fundamental, into manifestation, into objective reality, defined by duality, land and water, darkness and light. We see this repeated later in the separation of the sexes, with Adam and Eve representing whole races of mankind, great stages of human evolution. We can fast forward a couple of thousand years and put it another way. In the New Testament, John says this about the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So any reference to Word in a spiritual context is, of course, referring to the primordial verbum, the Om, the Pranava. This is the real meaning of sound and vibration, in its esoteric meaning. It is the initiation of every reality, every objective thing in the universe. The soundless sound at the heart of every spinning atom and every spiraling galaxy. But we should ask ourselves, why does it say word? In the beginning was the word, rather than perhaps tone, or noise, or sound. What's different about the use of the phrase word, or the word word? And it's the same in every translation, right? It says word. It conveys that there's meaning and intelligence, knowledge, history, legacy, teaching, intention. All these are implicit in the concept of a word. First, it's just an abstract sound. A word is a very special kind of sound and vibration, and it implies consciousness. In the first fundamental, HPB says, quote, "Space is neither a limitless void nor a conditioned fullness, but both. Being on the plane of absolute abstraction, the ever incognizable deity which is void only to finite minds, and on that of Mayavic, illusory perception, the plenum, the absolute container of all that is, whether manifested or unmanifested. It is therefore absolute all. She puts that in all caps. She says, there's no difference between the Christian apostles, quote, in him we live and move and have our being, unquote, and the Hindu rishis, quote, the universe lives in, proceeds from, and will return to Brahma. For Brahma, neuter, the unmanifest, is that universe in abscondito, and Brahma, the manifested, is the logos, made male-female, in the symbolic orthodox dogmas. We'll talk more about that male-female in just a moment. It has a footnote that is important to what we talk about with sound and vibration. The God of the apostle initiate and of the rishi being both the unseen and the visible space. Space is called in the esoteric symbolism the seven-skinned eternal mother-father. It is composed from its undifferentiated to its differentiated surface of 7 layers. What is that which was, is, and will be, whether there is a universe or not, whether there be gods or none, asks the esoteric Senzar Catechism. And the answer made is space. So the footnote on male-female in that quote, where she's talking about Brahma, the neuter versus the personalized, she says, she introduces this term Vach, V-A-C-H. Right? So it's an important term. This is as early as page 9. This is in the proem of the Secret Doctrine that we're introduced to this term, and yet we don't focus much on it. And it is, certainly an abstract idea. But I think in this context it's important. She says on that male-female footnote, see Manu's account of Brahma separating his body into male and female. The latter, the female Vach, in whom he creates Viraj. And compare this with the esotericism of chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Genesis. And this underscores for us this separation into duality, this separation into positive and negative, hot and cold, up and down, polarity that is characterized by vibration, or that characterizes vibration. And it also speaks to the esoteric quality of Genesis, right? So quoting from Genesis is intended, if we look back, to show how esoteric it is. If we read something like, the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, it would be very difficult to take that literally, that there's some physical being crouched over endless waters of earth. This is obviously metaphorical, it's obviously allegorical, it's obviously cosmological, it's obviously esoteric. God separated the light from the darkness. Brahma separates the male from the female. So in Judge's glossary, he says, Vach is speech or word, the mystic word, the logos, or collective host of Dion Chohans. In the Theosophical Glossary by Blavatsky, she says that Vach, to call Vach speech simply is deficient in clearness. Vach is the mystic personification of speech and the female logos, being one with Brahma, who created her out of one half of his body, which he divided into 2 portions. She is also one with Viraj, called the female Viraj, who was created in her by Brahma. In one sense, Vach is speech by which knowledge was taught to man. In another, she is the mystic secret speech, which descends upon and enters into the primeval rishis, the teachers of humanity, the sons of manifestation, as the tongues of fire are said to have sat upon the apostles. For she is called the female creator, the mother of the Vedas, etc., etc. Esoterically, she is the subjective creative force emanating from the creative deity, becoming the manifested world of speech, that is, the concrete expression of ideation, hence the word or logos, or as it goes on to say in John, in later verses, the word made flesh. Vach is the male and female atom of the first chapter of Genesis, and thus called Vach Viraj by the sages. She is also the celestial Saraswati produced from the heavens, a voice derived from speechless Brahma. So that's quotes from the Mahabharata. And the goddess of wisdom and eloquence. She's called Satarupa, the goddess of 100 forms. If we have time, we can return back to Vach. And there are 4 different types of Vach that are described, and you can talk more about Viraj. But there's more I want to get to with sound and vibration. From the framework that we've just set up, the esotericism of the Bible, its correspondence with the rishis, as HPB aligns them, we can start to see correspondences with the objective phenomena that forms the foundations of modern physics. It's been documented that Einstein himself kept a copy of the Secret Doctrine on his desk, and its influence is fairly clear in his work. For example, HPV says that the objective universe is an illusion, but that our objective existence is equally unreal and is therefore useful to us. There is that correspondence. It's purposeful. She articulates a nature of reality that's puzzling to scientists, puzzling to Einstein, and it's still today. Einstein's theories of relativity demonstrate a cosmological constant, right? This that is demonstrated by the speed of light. It doesn't change, regardless of any Newtonian frame of reference, any inertial frame, and it cannot be achieved by anything that has mass, right? So the theory of relativity tells us that energy and matter are equivalent. They can be converted, and in the Buddha's fire sermon, he talks about the ceaseless dissolution of matter. Right? This is this endless conversion of matter into energy and energy into matter that characterizes manifestation through sound and vibration. But interesting things happen when energy changes, when we increase the relativistic speed of objects that do have mass. The relative mass increases, and time starts to shift. We think of time as a constant thing, but it's very easy to demonstrate how relativity applies to this, and the experience of time that a being has in one place at one speed and one mass is different than the experience that a being at a higher speed has, or even a clock. It doesn't have to be objectively a being, but the physics are clear. We know this from experimental data and from very practical purposes like GPS satellites being out of sync with time clocks on Earth because they are further from the gravitational field of Earth, and so time is passing for those satellites in a slightly different quality of space-time. So we hear sometimes that nothing can go the speed of light, but light itself does, right? Photons, electrons, radio waves, electromagnetic energy, all of these things travel at the speed of light constantly. So it's not really the speed of light, it's what physicists are calling now the speed of causality. And they say that because the understanding of relativity is that as you approach the speed of light, if you were to theoretically exceed it, and it's theoretical because, again, nothing with mass can exceed it, then you would end up with effects happening before causes, right? Causes precede effects because we are sub-light speed, that is to say. the evidence of this is photons, light, travels at the speed of light and is a massless particle. So we have this like objective observation that we can make of how things behave in a massless state. Time doesn't pass for light. It's only through our frame of reference that we see it as a speed of something happening over a distance. So if things like radio waves and electrons had any mass, they would cease to be able to go the speed of light. What's universal, what kind of emphasizes the absolute, the abstract, kind of the first fundamental, is this tying up or unification of cause and effect into one thing, right? There's a quote from Judge that underscores this. He says, hold on, sorry, I'll find it. It's where he quotes, where he says in the Ocean of Theosophy that the effect and the cause are one. Maybe we'll have time to read the full quote later rather than just pulling it out. But the other interesting thing that happens as we adjust the energies in systems that are governed by sound and vibration, that is to say everything in manifestation, as you increase the heat energy of a system, or if you increase the energy of a system, the heat increases in that system. We have this variation in the states of matter. So matter at the solid state, if you heat that, it becomes liquid, and that state of matter. And then if you heat liquid sufficiently, it becomes the next state of matter, which is gas. If you heat gas sufficiently, you have the next state of matter, which is plasma. What's interesting about these is that 99% of the universe that we live in, because of the mass of stars, is plasma. There's very little matter between stars. Planets only make up a small portion of a solar system's mass. The vast majority is the star itself. And the star itself is plasma. Plasma is something that's so hot that the electrons and protons separate. And so they call it a sea of electrons. And this is what allows plasma to conduct electricity. If we compare this to the descriptions of the fire mist in the stanzas of Xian, we can see pretty clear parallels between these primordial states of the universe, these primordial states of matter, and the way they're described in the stanzas and in the Secret Doctrine, with what science is talking about now in terms of the ubiquity of plasma and the requirement for plasma for there to be a separation out of plasma into gas and out of gas into solidity, into solid matter. There's even a fifth state of matter that doesn't exist on its own in nature, at least not that we've ever discovered, and it's called a Bose Einstein condensate, or BEC. The reason it's worth, in a theosophical discussion, talking about a Bose Einstein condensate is because of what happens when we achieve that state of matter. It's going in the other direction, right? So as we increase heat, these states of matter are achieved. If we decrease heat from plasma, we get gas. We decrease the heat, we go from gas to solid. If we continue to decrease the heat, we do this with a very complex laboratory use of lasers and things, and it's done with bosons. Bose was Satyendra Bose. He was a physicist working in the 1920s alongside Einstein, which is why it's called a Bose Einstein condensate. It reduces so the gas, the atoms are separated widely, and they're moving around wildly. If they move around too much and they get to the plasma level, then the electrons actually split off. But with the atoms still intact, a gas, they're moving around wildly. A liquid, they're moving around more slowly, but they're still not, they're still will interchange in space with each other. With a solid, they've slowed down so much that they form bonds that they vibrate only within their own space. They aren't exchanging places with other atoms in the same solid. But they're very tightly aligned. They start to form structures. When you get to the Bose Einstein condensate, it's the temperature is reduced to near absolute zero. Absolute zero is like an abstract concept. That there's no actual. You'd have to have no matter and no energy for there to be something at absolute zero. But they get very, very, very close. Just decimal point and multiple zeros and some value of a degree above absolute zero. And what happens is the atoms actually collapse into a single quantum waveform. So they no longer have individual existence. All the atoms in that object form this single quantum state. They cease to be individuals. They're no longer particles. They exist only as a waveform. This is a fairly clear parallel, not in necessarily a literal sense, though perhaps, but clearly in an analog sense. As an analogy, we can see the parallels between this collapse of the matter into a single waveform as a pralaya that can be sort of induced through the reduction of energy to an extreme. This is the point to make there. So as we transition from different states of matter, we can see how these parallel the manifestation of existence, the manifestation of the universe, cosmogenesis. So we have time to talk about Mr. Judge. This gets a little bit into the third fundamental proposition of the Secret Doctrine, wherein H.G. Blavatsky tells us that she proposes that there is possible this perfectibility of man. There's this evolution through the law of cycles. We ourselves, like the universe, incarnate and through an endless series of experiences that allows us to elevate and progress through different states of consciousness into a more advanced being. The process is governed by the law of cycles. It's governed and regulated by karma and reincarnation. So these are a couple of quotes from Mr. Judge that speak to these processes and how they kind of connect with the larger cosmogenesis processes of sound and vibration. He says, this is page 56-7 of the Ocean, that the organs and senses do not cognize objects. Hypnotism, mesmerism, and spiritualism have now proved. For as we see in mesmeric and hypnotic experiments, the object seen or felt, and from which all the effects of solid objects may be sensed, is often only an idea existing in the operator's brain. In the same way, Manas, using the astral body, has only to impress an idea upon the other person to make the latter see the idea and translate it into a visible body from which the usual effects of density and weight seem to follow. In hypnotism, there are many experiments, all of which go to show that so-called matter is not per se solid or dense, that sight does not always depend on the eye and rays of light proceeding from an object, that the intangible for one normal brain and organs may be perfectly tangible for another, and that the physical effects in the body may be produced from an idea solely. He says, Theosophy applies to the self, the thinker, the same laws which are seen everywhere in operation throughout nature. And those are all varieties of the great law that effects follow causes, and no effect is without a cause. That's page 79 in the Ocean. He says, how is the present life affected by that bygone act? Meaning, something that you did in the past, how does that affect us now? Everything done in a former body has consequences which in the new birth the ego must enjoy or suffer. The ego being the immortal aspect of our nature that reincarnates from life to life. For the effect is in the cause, and karma produces the manifestation of it. So that was the quote I was trying to find. The effect is in the cause. It's only through karma, which is action and reaction, right? It's the law of cause and effect that allows us to experience it and produces the manifestation of it, right? Manifestation, we know by definition, is an illusion, right? It's the objective experience of a subjective reality. It's the phenomenon that indicates that there is a noumenon, right? A noumenon is the cause, a phenomenon is the effect. So it says, no act is performed without a thought at its root. But these thoughts are lodged in that part of man which we have called manas, the mind, and there remain as subtle but powerful links with magnetic threads that enmesh the solar system, and through which various effects are brought out. The theory put forward in earlier pages that the whole system to which the globe belongs is alive, conscious on every plane, and though only in man showing self-consciousness, comes into play here to explain how the thought under the act in this life may cause result in this or the next birth. Finally, he says, the imagination is the picture-making power of the human mind. It is, in the ordinary average human, it has not enough training or force to be more than a sort of dream, but it may be trained. When trained, it is the constructor in the human workshop. Arrived at that stage, it makes a matrix in the astral substance through which effects objectively will flow. It is the greatest power, after will, in the human assemblage of complicated instruments. That's from page 139. This was a subject that begged for further exploration. There is a lot more to it. More could be discussed about Vach, more could be discussed about the sons of the fire mist itself. It goes on and on. It really touches every conceivable aspect of the philosophy, every conceivable aspect of our reality, and of the subjective beyond our reality. So with that, I'm just going to open it up for questions and comments.
We talked a lot about cause and effect. In general, I think it's assumed that it's linear. It's a linear thing, cause and effect. But this student's understanding is it's not linear. Everything that will happen or has happened is already here in Akasha, or whatever term is appropriate for that. And it can be tied to holographic universe theory. So I want us to explore that more, and we get these insights non-linearly. It doesn't have to be, okay, I did this, then that's why I got this insight. It happens instantaneously. You just get this non-linear communication from your higher self, whatever realm that you're connecting with. So any thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, of course. So the question is about the non-linearity of time and experience and cause and effect. HPB says pretty clearly in the Secret Doctrine that time is simply a way of experiencing consciousness, that it is a conscious state followed by another conscious state followed by another conscious state, and that we only experience it this way as an artifact of manifested existence. That prior to manifestation, prior to the second logos, there is no time. The abstract reality is timeless. One can think of an analogy of a pre-recorded program on a DVD or a video on YouTube or something like that. We experience it one frame at a time. The whole thing exists unexpressed, unmanifest, somewhere else, on some inaccessible reality. The whole of it is there. It's only in our experience of it that we see it over time. We can't experience it all at once. Consciousness in man's evolution is not evolved to that point yet. Not through monastic understanding can we do anything other than see these things as this moment in time followed by this moment in time. And this is what gives us the illusion of linearity. It gives us the illusion that a cause is somehow separated by an effect. It's separated by time, but time doesn't really exist. So those two things are actually one. They're not two things in one. They're two things that are one. Right? Like they're not two separate things at all. This is someone put it once that a photon, when it is formed and exists and comes from a sun, wherever it lands, it gets there instantaneously because it has no mass to experience the passage of time. Right? Time and mass are connected through space-time. It's very complex. I don't pretend to be a physicist and be able to explain it in any more detail than we've already covered, but that nonlinearity is covered pretty clearly in the Secret Doctrine. HPB talks about consciousness being just our experience of successive, time being our experience of successive states of consciousness, I think is the quote. Yes, please.
You mentioned the word, and this article in Theosophy, it's from HPB, if I may quote it.
Please.
She says, in the Secret Doctrine, she's talking about, quotation, the divine resonance spoken of above is not the divine light itself. The resonance is only the outbreathing of the first sound of the entire Aum. It manifests itself only as the power which stirs up and animates the particles of the universe, but also in the evolution and dissolution of man, of the animal and mineral kingdoms, and the solar system.
Okay.
So it adds to your statement.
Yes.
That the Bible starts at the manifested aspect of our universe, but also doesn't that really leave something out? That supreme, unmanifested, unknowable, eternal, omnipresent, omniscient essence? Without that, then we'll truly fall into the manifested world, and that's not where it starts.
Right, right. Which is why we need to emphasize deep study of the first fundamental proposition of the Secret Doctrine, because that's where she takes us a step back from Genesis. Right? She takes a step back from just simply separating water and land, or even separating light and darkness. There is this subjective reality before that. It's even to say subjective reality betrays what it is. She calls it beingness, like the quality of being, separate from being, and it really is separate even from the duality of subjective and objective. Like it's even more subjective than subjective itself. So it's it's almost in a way, to the student's mind, we come in the Judaic tradition in the Old Testament with light, and then 2,000 years later we're given one step back, which is vibration itself with the word, and then 2,000 years later with HPV we're given another step back, which is even further into the reaches of the unknowable. Yes, excellent point. Thank you.
Talking about states of being, does Theosophy go into the details of, as you raise yourself to higher states of being, you are resonating in certain frequencies / vibrations / sounds, or can you utilize certain sounds to raise your consciousness? Is there any discussion or your thoughts on that? How to utilize these, or what are the effects of higher awareness in terms of sound and vibration?
Yeah, certainly the literature makes reference throughout to the impact of exercising one's consciousness and elevating one's consciousness and raising the vibration is a phrase we see throughout. Specific numbers, cycles per second, for example, are rare, in the exoteric literature that we're aware of. There may be material we can glean from that and draw correspondences from a statement here and a statement there and a statement somewhere else that helps us to have a more clear understanding of what the numbers would be in that sense. But we can certainly say that the concept is there throughout the literature that HVB talks about, and Judge as well, about raising the entire consciousness of humanity, and that's part of this process of karma and reincarnation, that we come back and we learn lessons, we contribute through our efforts at service to humanity, to a larger collective consciousness in buddhi that resonates throughout the universe, and certainly resonates with other people. Any effort that we make will find a corresponding resonant effort somewhere else. And that's a very easy thing to demonstrate in physics, and there's the whole idea of sympathetic vibration between a well-tuned piano and a well-tuned violin. One will resonate with the other in the same room, just passing through the molecules of air in between. There's not. This is not magic. This is not esoteric. It's not a mystery. We know objectively from science and physics how that happens, but it's a perfect analog and to what happens on the levels of consciousness. And given that science can't point to anything anywhere that doesn't have vibration, the idea that consciousness itself would be the one thing exempt from vibration, and that it would, having vibration in some way be exempt from the qualities we see in vibration everywhere else in the objective universe, is absurd, right? So there must be this correspondence that logic would force us to admit. It's there in the literature. We're told that this exists, but it also becomes fairly clear just through a logic, reasoned logical analysis of it. We're also told about the more rarefied vestures of beings like the Nirmanakaya robe or the Sambhogakaya robe. These are bodies that are formed based on a particular level of consciousness. These are clearly documented in the Voice of Silence, especially in the footnotes, about why different beings would have different types of bodies and how these are they are created for them through their consciousness that is operating at a particular vibratory rate. They've elevated it to a certain rarefied level of vibration that qualifies them to exist in this rarefied state as well. So that certainly has to be true even in these bodies, even at our level. Anything we do to meditate, to contemplate, to concentrate, and to focus our reality assigning powers. He talks about the power of imagination and the power of will. Anything we do to focus those and concentrate is that process of training that he talked about, and will have its benefit and effect.
And just to prove your point, it says here that the difference between ordinary people and an adept or even a partly developed student is that the rate of the vibration of the brain molecules as well as the coordinations of those with the vibrations of the higher brain may lie at the bottom of the difference and also explain other problems. So just to prove your point, the vibratory rate is different among different people, but the developed ones are even more different than the ordinary ones.
Right.
And it says somewhere in here, talks about lunacy. Here it says here, the brain, no, that's not it. I can't find it, I'm sorry. It said that the person internally knows that they're not crazy, but because of the vibratory difference between the inner man and the outer, the communication is not clear.
Right.
And that wrong treatment in this, she's talking about, of course, the 20th century, that the person truly then is separated. And that is what she names as a lunatic.
Lunacy, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. One is reminded of the analogy of the orchestra, right? If there's one instrument in the orchestra that isn't tuned in the same way that all the other instruments are, it can be heard separate and apart from all the others. It by its nature of being out of tune, not the right vibration, not a corresponding harmonious, synchronous vibration, it separates itself. And it sounds like if this is the case within ourselves, the symphony of ourselves
rhythm,
of a man.
the rhythm.
Yeah, if we have one of our vectors, one of our principles that's out of tune, then we will have this communication problem. Yeah.
So in line with that, if you are familiar with sound and vibration and the chakra system, for example, for healing purposes and recovery purposes, can't you use certain sounds and certain colors to treat people? I know we have that topic later, but I would like to hear from a sound and vibration perspective. Can you influence so that it's more in line with a being's higher self, or just in line with their integrity, truth?
Certainly, yeah. There's lots of evidence that the use of sound, vibration, color, all of these things do contribute to either a positive or negative health state in our physical bodies, and that translates to all levels of our existence, really. In that everything is sound and vibration, right? So the appropriate use, and I would emphasize appropriate use of these vibrations certainly would be could be beneficial. The important thing is to be discriminating in terms of the origins and sources of the information that we have about these things. There are ancient systems that have been proven and tested throughout history that we do still have some access to, more so in the East, but it's becoming more and more prevalent in the West, that are legitimate. They don't have the imprimatur of modern science, because they are working on levels and planes of existence that science doesn't yet fully understand and doesn't yet recognize. And certainly in the past, and to some extent even now, outright denies. Science is becoming more and more enlightened. It's beginning to see that a sort of morphogenetic field and connectivity. These things are a fringe science now, but will no doubt be mainstream in time. But in the meantime, we have these ancient sciences that have persisted throughout the East and do well to inform our healthcare practices now. Definitely. Yeah.
Didn't Doesn't it say somewhere in Theosophy, or there's a suggestion that the Great Pyramids were built through the use of sound and vibration?
Yeah, the student's not
find
sure of
that?
the exact reference to that. That would certainly have been an interesting aspect of this talk. That's kind of what I meant by it. Just there's so much more out there. Yeah, I mean, we know from the Bible about the walls of Jericho being brought down by trumpet blasts, and we know about, we have heard that the pyramids were perhaps constructed with sound, or the statues at Easter Island. There's a lot of potential applications of sound and vibration, and we see, that the way it's described, in the beginning, what's the word, is not literal. It's not literally like something that was made of letters and somebody said it, but it conveys a meaning, and it wasn't like sound in the sense of the type of sound that we hear, or I can read I think it's probably time I'll read the different description of the different types of Vach, right? There's one that is an utterance, which is like what we objectively hear and can convey from one person to another. That's not what the word is at the beginning of cosmic evolution. And similarly, the sound, quote unquote, that moved the pyramids may not be a literal sound. The walls of Jericho coming down with a trumpet blast may not have been a literal trumpet blast. But that may be allegorical or symbolical of some other type of use of vibration to produce phenomena. I think that's certainly borne out by the philosophy. Sure.
I've also heard that you can even break glass with sound, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can just see that on YouTube. I mean, people do that all the time, yeah.
Seems like if you could do that, it makes sense that the pyramids would come in and everything.
Right. And the difference there, between me singing and breaking a glass and an opera singer trained singing and breaking a glass is twofold. One, precision, hitting exactly the right harmonic that the glass can't endure, and the amount of energy. Right? There has to be a sufficiently loud sound. It has to be, to actually, break the glass. Obviously, thicker glass is going to require louder sound. So applying that idea by analogy to walls coming down with trumpets or floating pyramid blocks, or something like that, we'd have to assume that both precision and level of energy are variables that would have to be controlled. What technology allowed the creation of sound of that level of energy, the student would be unaware, but that it's possible is pretty clearly made evident by that example. It's a good example.
The Secret Doctrine and HPV in her writings explains that levitation is dependent on you changing your polarity to the one that exists in the center of the earth,
Right.
and that way you're lifted up. So since these builders, she calls them, were all initiated priests at the beginning, and the Masons also, she refers it in the first 30 pages of the Secret Doctrine, then there is really no reason why an initiated adept builder could not change the polarity of the block against that of the earth to lift it up.
Right.
I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to do it.
Right.
Truly. Because those pieces are so gigantic, our equipment today, not able to lift them
Right.
easily. The repairs they were showing on PBS were conducted under tremendous duress. So it stands to reason that that is not how they did it, but they definitely
Right.
used that polarity change as well as the precision-oriented, I think she calls them proportions.
Interesting. Yeah, the idea that some kind of brute force was involved in building the pyramids does seem kind of silly when you examine just what it would take. So yeah, that mystery remains, I think.
And it's precision oriented,
Yeah.
as you said. So
Finding that precise vibration.
proportion, the
Yeah,
proportion.
Proportion, sure. Yeah. Let me read briefly this quote. This is from the Secret Doctrine on Volume 1, page 432, and it's related to Vach. She says, our old writers, she's actually quoting something else here, I'm not sure exactly. There's a lot of quotes interspersed within this quote, but she says, quoting, our old writers said that Vach is of 4 kinds: para Vach, pasyanti Vach, madhyama Vach, and vaikari Vach, which is a statement found in the Rig Veda and the Upanishads. Vaikari Vach is what we utter. It is sound, speech, that again which becomes comprehensive and objective to one of our physical senses and may be brought under the laws of perception. Hence, every kind of Vaikari Vach exists in its madhyama, pasyanti, and ultimately in its para form. The reason why this pranava, which is the word, right, the Om, is called Vach is this, that these 4 principles of the great cosmos correspond to these 4 forms of Vach. The whole cosmos, in its objective form, is Vaikari Vach. The light of the Logos is the Madhyama form. The Logos itself is the Pasyanti form, while Parabrahm is the Para form of Vach. She says, which is beyond the noumenon of all noumena. So, capital N on noumena. So, this idea, it goes deep very quickly when you start to examine it, and yet it's essential even to just be communicating with you now, right? Vibration, sound, it's so fundamental to everything at highest and lowest levels of everything. So, yeah.
But the Secret Doctrine makes that differentiation between the noumenal and the phenomenal, because it is necessary to the subjective understanding of the human soul.
Mm-hmm.
When you have actually transcended all of the phenomenal aspects of our universe, then you are in the homogeneous noumenal aspect of the universe, where things are permanently established, and so then you learn what the truth really is, because soul-wise your vibration is the same as that field that you have entered in silence. So it shows you how important it is to learn to control our lower vibratory rates of our sheaths to enable the higher to express itself. She says it somewhere, I read a lot, I don't remember where I read everything. She says that in order to hear your God, the inner God, you have to learn silence.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an easy thing to do for our humanity
Right.
at this stage of development. We become chatterboxes.
That's why she called the book Voice of the Silence.
Yeah.
Just a minor point of clarification, and I only say it because it's, to me, so interesting. She says in this that she's not drawing a distinction between noumenon and phenomenon, like the root cause of something and its effect, phenomenal effect. She's saying that para Vach is beyond the noumenon of all noumena, capital N, plural. So she's drawing a distinction between all root causes and the root cause.
The causeless cause.
Causeless cause. It's not even talking about phenomenon at that point. So it's pretty cosmic. Okay, we'll end there. Thank you very much. Next week we have
next Sunday's talk is on health and tridosha.
health and tridosha.
And we'll take a 10-minute break now and then reconvene offline in our discussion of the key to theosophy.
Thank you.